Several significant battles occurred in the Pacific campaigns of the war, including the Battle of Coral Sea in May of 1942, which was significant in that it was fought entirely with aircraft, showing the new direction in naval warfare. The Battle of Midway in June of 1942 would be the true turning point of the Pacific War. U.S. intelligence had finally been able to decipher the Japanese naval code, though they had known the diplomatic code for some months. With the breaking of the naval code, U.S. could know precisely where the Japanese carriers were at and where they were heading. In one strike that lasted approximately 5 minutes, U.S. aircraft were able to sink 3 of Japan's 4 carriers and damage the 4th so heavily that it sank later that same day. The actions at the Battle of Midway would tip the balance of power in the Pacific clearly in favor of the Americans. Beginning in 1943, the United States began to pursue a policy of island hopping, beginning with the Battle of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, as the U.S. sought to retake islands that had been lost in the early months of the war. The island hopping campaign was a coordinated effort between the U.S. Navy under Admiral Chester Nimitz and the U.S. Army under the command of Douglas MacArthur. Many of these battles were particularly fierce, some lasting for months, with the United States taking some islands and leaving others, always keeping Japan guessing as to which was the next target. As the Americans drew closer to Japan, the fighting became fiercer and more desperate. Japan even resorted to the use of kamikaze aircraft piloted by men who were essentially on a suicide mission. It was believed that kamikaze planes would be more accurate in targeting American warships than simply having bombers fly overhead, dropping bombs. More than 3,800 Japanese pilots would die in kamikaze attacks, of which less than 20% actually were successful in hitting a U.S. ship. As the U.S. moved closer towards Japan, they began to focus first on the recovery of the Philippines, and then getting themselves into a position to launch air raids on Japan itself. At the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in world history, begun in October of 1944, the United States would begin the recovery process of the Philippines. Then, as part of the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the United States would score major victories, retaking control of the Marianas in what came to be known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The reason it was called this is because by now so many Japanese pilots had been lost that the U.S. was able to relatively easily maintain air superiority. They were shooting down Japanese pilots faster than replacement pilots could be trained. The Battle of Iwo Jima in 1945, the United States would fight a fierce battle for control of the island and its very significant airstrip. Within a couple of months, the United States also took control of Okinawa, battling for that island between April and June of 1945. This would represent the fiercest fighting in the war, and there were more than 50,000 American casualties. But it virtually destroyed Japan's remaining defenses and would put the U.S. Air Forces within easy flight distance of Japan itself. It is the fighting on Okinawa that would influence the eventual use of the atomic bomb in order to prevent further U.S. casualties from ground assaults. That atomic bomb was developed in the Manhattan Project, a top-secret program initially proposed to President Roosevelt in a letter that was written by Albert Einstein back in 1939. He suggested the possibility of using the power generated from splitting an atom in order to make a weapon to hasten the end of war. The bomb itself would be successfully tested in mid-July 1945 at Alamogordo, New Mexico.
3, 2, 1, 0.
The atomic bomb had been developed with the knowledge of America's British allies, but they had not informed the Soviets. When President Truman met with the rest of the Big Three at the Potsdam Conference in the summer of 1945, he hinted that Japan would have to surrender unconditionally or suffer complete and utter destruction. Japan refused, as they did not want to remove the emperor, but suggested they might be willing to surrender if the emperor would remain on the throne. Advised by military brass that an invasion of Japan might result in 1 million U.S. casualties, Truman decided to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. We won the race of discovery against the Germans. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
An estimated 90,000 Japanese were killed immediately, with more than 100,000 injured. Still more would die in the days following the attack. But the Japanese government still did not surrender. The attack on Hiroshima virtually wiped out the center portion of the city, reducing many buildings to ash. It was destruction on a scale that the world had never seen. Two days after the bombing, the Soviet Union entered the war against Japan as they had promised. And the following day, a second U.S. atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki, resulting in at least 60,000 more deaths immediately, plus still more due to things such as radiation poisoning. To this day, the United States is the only nation to have ever used the atomic bomb in warfare. 5 days after the bombing at Nagasaki, Japan announced that they would surrender. World War II was officially going to be over. The formal surrender documents would be signed on September 2, 1945, on board the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay.